You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
They made you read Hamlet back in the day, right? You remember this from when you were a kid? Maybe you watched the Mel Gibson version. I assume Kenneth Branagh probably did a version of that too. He does all the Shakespeare stuff. Hamlet is probably one of the three famousest Shakespeare plays. It's got to be, right? Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, maybe Julius Caesar sneaks in there. I don't know. I've never calculated in my brain what are the most famousest of the Shakespeare plays. But everybody's heard about Hamlet. He's a prince. It's set in Denmark. There is an usurper who kills the king and takes the throne for himself. And it falls to young Prince Hamlet to figure out who done it, what the heck is going on here, to get to the bottom of his suspicions and to bring about a righting of wrongs and some vengeance. And it does have a lot of themes about the hollowness of revenge, kind of in the same vein as Portis's book and the John Wayne film True Grit. And it's a beloved story that is pretty dark, but when you really go and look at it, there's some lighthearted, whimsical moments as well. It has a few of the same hallmarks as the book of Esther, maybe in that regard. But it's a pretty complicated story structure, and people debate where the pivot point of this story is. Now, come on, you're always looking for a pivot point. If I threw out any number of beloved stories, you could probably pretty quickly say, oh, well, the turning point was right here. If I threw out events from history, you could probably say, oh, the turning point was right here. World War II, it was D-Day. And the Allies won D-Day when they took the beach at great, great expense. That was the turning point. When you look at your life, your business, your relationships, you can always find that inflection point, that tipping point. And in Hamlet, I think part of the fun of the story is that there are three pretty good options. It's not quite so automatic. Some people look at the story of Hamlet and they say, all right, the turning point is when Hamlet has the chance to kill Claudius. He's the usurper. He's the guy who did the murdering to get the throne. But Claudius is praying, and so Hamlet's like, I could just stab him, but if I stab him now, I'm going to send his soul flying off to heaven because he's praying. I'm going to wait till he's doing something bad. Well, passing on that proves to be a very consequential decision. Other people look at it and they'd say, no, the turning point of Hamlet is clearly when Hamlet gets caught up in an angry, vindictive rage, and he thinks Claudius is maybe right there in the room with his mom and maybe hiding behind a tapestry. Here's some shuffling around. So he goes stabbing around through a tapestry, but he gets the wrong guy. He gets Polonius. There was almost nothing wrong with Polonius. Come on. Well, now Hamlet has changed. It's a turning point because now he's got blood on his hands as well. This is getting ugly now. In his quest for vengeance, somebody needs to take vengeance against him. But the part that I think is the turning point of Hamlet is the part where there is a play within a play. Hamlet brings in a bunch of actors to put on a little play, and he helps them with the script. And in the script, somebody kills a king, and Hamlet Jr., he crafts it all in such a way that it looks a lot like how he imagines things went down with Claudius's murder of King Hamlet Sr. And then Hamlet, the living Hamlet Jr., is in there. He's just looking. And he's like, look at Claudius. He's all upset. And Claudius melts down because sure enough, that is how the thing happened. Now, I think it's incredibly poignant and one of the most memorable scenes that I've ever encountered in a story ever. And I would say that is my guess for what is the turning point. It's kind of fun, though, that you don't automatically know and you have to think about it a little bit. To me, that's a sign of sophistication in the story. Well, I'm guessing you can tell where this is all going, and that is toward thinking about what is the inflection point? What is the turning point in the book of Esther? I mean, here we are getting to the end of chapter 7. Haman is defeated. He's been hung on his own gallows. But really, where did this story pivot? Well, let's consider a few possibilities, shall we? Possibility number 1 is that it pivots when Mordecai low-key threatens Esther and is like, hey, I don't think that you're going to escape. And that puts pressure on her. But when you look at the big picture of everything, it doesn't seem like Mordecai's pressure is really the central point of the story. It seems like it's more just part of the narrative flow of how we get to the place where Esther takes action, which brings us to option number 2, which is when Esther takes action. And she's like, all right, this is going to happen, fast and tell everybody else to fast, and then I'm going to go do it. And if I perish, I perish. That's at the end of chapter 4. And I guess it could be that, but that doesn't really resolve the problem. It's just both of those things are a contribution to the activation of the character who's going to set things in motion toward resolutions. I don't think either of those are it. Well, here's another option. Maybe it's the moment where she decides to finally walk into the king's court, and you get the dramatic moment where will the king receive her, will he not? And he extends the scepter. And when he favorably receives her, that's the pivot point. But she still hasn't asked at that point for the thing that she wants. So I don't think it's there either. And another reason I don't think it can be any of those 3 pivot points is that narratively, there's still a whole other wrench in the works that we haven't encountered yet. In chapter 5, banquet number 1 occurs, but remember, coming out of banquet number 1, the rivalry between Mordecai and Haman is rekindled, and Haman goes home and decides to kill Mordecai, and all of this happens very quickly. Esther probably doesn't even know about this. The king doesn't know about this, and Esther is not going to be positioned to resolve this. So one of the good guys, one of the 4 main characters, is going to die, and he's been the big advocate that has been looking out for 2 of the 3 others, the king and for Esther. And somehow in the rhythm of the story, it feels like if Mordecai gets killed by Haman, Haman is going to get his way across the board. As readers, we really don't want that horrible injustice to happen. We don't want the floodgates of bloodshed on the part of Haman to open up, but nobody's there to do anything about it, which leads me to my next possible pivot point, and this is the one that I think when you really ruthlessly, analytically break down the story of Esther, this is the one that I think is actually the pivot point. It's at the beginning of chapter 6. I think this seemingly innocuous, mundane verse, I think this is the pivot point of the whole book. Esther 6:1. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. That's it. That's the wild card. Nothing else should have happened between Haman determining with his drunk friends and wife that he was going to kill Mordecai first thing in the morning, and him actually killing Mordecai first thing in the morning. There's no business hours in there. The king doesn't hold court in there. There's no opportunity for other people to come in and be like, wait, I must speak now because otherwise I could never forever hold my peace. This wicked man is trying to kill Mordecai. We can't have that happening. Mordecai's a good dude. He saved the king one time. There's no window of time for that to happen. The only remaining opportunity is for the king to have that occur to him when he should be sleeping. And then that's exactly what happens. It's just wild. Why wouldn't he have thought of that any of the other nights that have passed? I mean, what are we talking about here? 1,500, 1,800 nights have passed? I mean, it's wild. It seemed like with each passing night, it would be less likely that he would think about that, and yet here we are. It's really that moment that sets in motion all the other possible pivot points. I don't think the parade is really a pivot point. That's a payoff in the story. And once the parade has happened, Haman's own family has announced to him, you're dead. You're going to lose this thing. It's already been determined. So the text itself, through the mouth of Haman's wife and friends, has already said that by the time we get to the end of chapter 6, after the parade and heading into the second banquet with Esther, I mean, it's already done. It's already decided. His fate is already determined. So we're not into pivot point there. We're into payoff, and then we just went all the way through chapter 7, and then all of the drama at the party where Esther comes clean about who she is and what's happening, and Xerxes gets mad, and Haman throws himself at the mercy of the queen, but does so in like a weird way with like his hips or something, his back, like he just goes after, like it's just not how he should have approached her. It's not an appropriate posture before the queen, and then he ends up getting hung, and that's the end of chapter 7. So I'm coming back to this, and I'm cool with this if you see it differently. There are really smart people who write books about Esther, and they see this differently. I am not the knower of all the things. I'm just looking at the same information you are. But if indeed Esther 6:1 is the pivot point of this story, that's a really weird pivot point, right? Because Esther didn't do anything. It makes her kind of not totally the hero, if that's the pivot point. She's sharing the spotlight with what? Fate? Circumstance? These circumstances and the odds against them all lining up seem a little bit long for me to go with that. I think she's sharing the spotlight, or maybe even conceding the spotlight to the God who ultimately moves the hearts of kings like a watercourse. And if indeed that is the pivot point to the whole story, I just think it's fascinating that really none of the four main characters can ultimately get credit for the outcome. I mean, Haman kind of can for causing all the problems that boomerang around on him. Mordecai contributed, Esther contributed, and even Xerxes, he makes a good judgment here in chapter 6 and chapter 7. So they all contribute, but they never would have been in the room at the same time. They never would have been examining the same question, the big question, at the same time. The timing wouldn't have worked out on any of it if it wasn't for this really strange, really unusual, almost anti-dramatic pivot point. And it seems to me that if that is the pivot point, which I understand that's like the fourth time I've said that, it seems to me that if that is the pivot point, that there's some kind of implicit message just sitting there in the structure of this story. And it kind of harkens back to that whole Old Testament principle of the still small voice of God. God's not necessarily in the fire, the earthquake, or the big dramatic stuff. I mean, I suppose if you look at all of the Bible, he's in that stuff too. But these little, very seemingly mundane things can have massive consequences when there's a God behind them who is master over the unfolding of all of history and everything that happens ever. That was fun to break down. Good talk. I kind of want to go watch that Mel Gibson Hamlet again. He was awesome in that. It's a kid Mel Gibson, pre-Braveheart Mel Gibson even. It was real, real good. If you've never seen that one, go check it out. I think you can bring the kids. I don't know. It's Hamlet. Check that. It's a tragedy. It's Shakespeare. It gets a little bit grisly. Whatever. I think I'm going to go watch it again. Maybe I'll appreciate it more than I did last time I saw it in 8th grade. All right, that's plenty for now. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.